In those grim hours, when the shadows of grief still clung to the chapel's altar where we said our farewells to Father, they were already dividing his legacy, handing everything to my brothers right there, amid the echo of prayers and muffled sobs, as if death itself had been nothing more than a pretext for this inevitable partition. My name is Nicholas, and at 37 I feel like a wanderer in a labyrinth of family secrets, where every turn reveals a new facet of betrayal and neglect, and a past built on devotion and labor suddenly crumbles into illusion, fragile as an autumn leaf in a sudden gust of wind. The last 10 years of my life were inseparably bound to Father within the depths of Tarnwick Industries, that colossal manufacturing empire which rose as a pillar of the United Kingdom's economy. The hum of its machines merged with the rhythm of human lives, and the annual profit of $540 million was not just a number, but a testament to the indomitable will with which Father built it from nothing, employing more than 3,000 souls whose hands and minds transformed raw material into symbols of progress. I knew every corner of it so intimately it felt like an extension of my own body. Every floor, its echoing corridors, every machine, its gears whirring in unison with my heartbeat, every foreman by name, with stories steeped in sweat and loyalty. For years, I breathed it in until I became part of that vast organism that fed the nation's economy. My brothers, however, never once set foot in that world, living far removed, in realms where production was but a distant myth, unworthy of their notice. And yet it was they who inherited the crown I helped forge day after day. The reading of the will came just 2 hours after the earth had closed over Father's coffin, in that very chapel, still thick with lilies and incense. We, the family, sat in tense silence, waiting for fate's verdict to tear us apart and reveal the true intentions of the departed. My elder brother, Julian, with his aristocratic bearing and frosty gaze, received the Kensington mansion, a grand 4-story residence with a glittering pool and staff quarters whispering of bygone opulence, valued at $30 million, not merely a home but a monument to privilege he would accept as his birthright. My other brother, Adrian, with his eternal adventurer's grin, was bequeathed a Gulfstream G650, that flying palace able to cross oceans with the grace of an eagle. His face lit up as though he'd just hit the jackpot in some celestial lottery where the stakes were lives and dreams. Then came the business itself, the empire's beating heart, its assets, patents, contracts, and properties, worth a staggering $540 million. All of it split evenly between Julian and Adrian. 50-50, as though Father had chosen to erase me from the equation, handing over the very thing I had nurtured and built by his side, leaving me to sit in the shadow of their triumph. I sat there in my rain-soaked morning suit, heavy with grief, waiting for my name to be called, for recognition of those years of loyalty. But the lawyer, expressionless, finally lifted his eyes, cleared his throat as if shaking dust off an ancient scroll, and produced a crumpled, yellowed envelope, its corners bent, as if it had lain forgotten in some drawer of secrets for decades. He slid it across the polished mahogany table toward me and whispered, "For Nicholas." The air thickened instantly, foretelling a storm. Julian burst into laughter, that sharp sound slicing the silence like a blade, and Adrian soon joined him, their mirth clashing in cruel harmony. Our aunt covered her mouth in feigned horror, while a cousin looked away in shame, unwilling to witness the farce. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope. Inside lay nothing but a one-way train ticket from London to Paris, departure the following morning at 8:15. No note, no explanation, just that slip of paper, promising a journey into the unknown, mocking me with its emptiness. A train ticket, Julian sneered, venom dripping from every word. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Adrian leaned back, smirking, and added, "Father always did have a sense of humor." The lawyer said nothing. He simply gathered his papers with mechanical precision and departed, followed by the others, leaving me alone in that hollow room of echoes and shadows, clutching the ticket, flipping it over and over, searching the envelope for hidden meaning, finding only nothingness. My father had left me a train ticket to Paris, while my brothers carried away everything he had ever built. Years of labor, transformed into their trophies. That evening, I returned to my modest flat in Clerkenwell, a single-room refuge I had rented 5 years earlier, clinging to illusions that I might one day inherit the helm of the company. But it had never happened. Father had kept me pinned as operations director, never allowing me to rise higher, as though I were only a shadow in his grand design. Julian and Adrian had never worked a single day there. Julian's hedge fund bled losses 3 years in a row, sinking into financial ruin, while Adrian spent his days in country clubs and charity galas, where champagne flowed like rivers and conversations were as hollow as autumn winds. Neither could name what we manufactured, nor who our clients were. Yet they were the ones to inherit the empire, and I, the one ticket. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, amber fire burning my throat with its warmth of oblivion, and sat by the window, gazing at London's lights dancing like distant stars. I recalled conversations with Father about expanding into Europe, about building a factory in Lyon. He had mentioned Paris once or twice, the city of light and secrets. Perhaps this ticket bore some hidden meaning, an invitation to explore new horizons. Or perhaps it was his way of saying, softly but cruelly, that I should leave, start anew elsewhere, stop waiting for recognition that would never come. I thought about throwing the ticket away, letting it vanish with the scraps of everyday life. Or calling Julian in fury, demanding an explanation. Or hiring a lawyer to contest the will and expose the injustice. But I did none of that. I just sat there, sipping whiskey, letting its warmth spread through my veins, and wondering why my father despised me enough to humiliate me before the whole family, leaving me only this symbol of departure. The next morning, I packed a small bag with only the bare essentials, telling no one of my departure. I simply made my way to St. Pancras Station, where the hum of trains blended with the rhythm of the morning rush, and boarded the 8:15 train. The ticket was first class. At least Father had granted me that small luxury for the journey. I settled into a window seat, watching as London melted away behind me, as if my old life were dissolving into the fog. 2 hours later, we pulled into Paris, Gare du Nord, a whirlwind of platforms and human streams. I stepped onto the platform with no plan, no hotel reservation, no reason to be there beyond the will of a dead man, whispered to me through a slip of paper. I was heading toward the exit when I saw him, a man in a gray suit, holding a placard with my name printed in bold black letters, Nicholas. I froze. He caught my eye and walked toward me. "Monsieur Nicholas?" he asked, his French accent caressing the air like the melody of the Seine. He introduced himself. "My name is Olivier. I was your father's attorney many years ago. Please, come with me." Then he turned and strode into the Parisian streets, and I followed, for in that moment I had nothing else to do but trust a stranger in the whirlwind of the city. Outside, a black car waited, gleaming beneath the morning sun. Olivier opened the door, inviting me in. We drove through Paris in silence, the streets flashing past the window like pages of a forgotten book. Twice I asked where we were going, but he did not answer. He only drove with concentrated grace. 20 minutes later, we stopped before a building in one of the aristocratic quarters, an old and beautiful 5-story residence of cream stone, its wrought iron balconies curving like the branches of ancient trees, whispering of centuries of history and secrets hidden behind its facade. Olivier stepped out with the elegance of a man accustomed to secrets and deals struck in the hush of stately offices. I followed him inside. The marble floors echoed with each step, and the air of the lobby was perfumed with polished wood, mingling with that elusive scent of old money, lingering like the ghost of bygone grandeur. We ascended in a mirrored lift that multiplied our reflections into infinity, and on the 4th floor he opened a door with a key that glinted like the emblem of fate's hidden doors. With a gesture, he invited me into a space that unfolded before me like a forgotten paradise, ceilings soaring like cathedral vaults, tall windows spilling Parisian light in golden streams, and furniture shrouded in white sheets, like slumbering ghosts awaiting their awakening. Olivier crossed the room with confident stride, retrieving a folder from his briefcase, and spoke in the calm tone of a man accustomed to revelations. "Your father purchased this property in 1998 as a base for his European operations. Even when times demanded austerity, he kept it, and in 2019 he transferred ownership into your name, without informing you. asking that the transfer remain confidential until his death, when it would be revealed at the proper moment, like a flower opening in the light of the setting sun. I stared at him, the words cutting through me like a cool wind on a stifling day. "What?" I managed. He nodded with unshaken composure. "This apartment belongs to you." He handed me the folder. Inside were the deeds, titles, legal documents bearing my name with irrevocable force, each page stamped with the hand of fate. I gazed around the apartment once more, this oasis in the heart of Paris, worth perhaps 10, even 15 million. Olivier, catching my expression, added, "And that is not all." He sat by the window where sunlight danced upon the table and drew out another folder, heavier, thicker, placing it before me with folded hands that heralded revelation. "In 2012, he said, your father established a private trust, separating assets from his main estate. It was designed to remain hidden from your brothers and the rest of the family, with you as sole beneficiary." My hands went numb as I sat across from him. "What assets?" I asked. He began to list them: commercial properties, investment portfolios, a controlling stake in a logistics company in Rotterdam. The total value, around 230 million euros. The room tilted before my eyes. I clutched the table to steady myself, staring at the abyss of sudden wealth. 230 million? I repeated. Olivier confirmed, explaining that father had spent 13 years moving assets in secret, using shell companies and offshore accounts, ensuring they remained beyond Tarnwick Industries, hidden from my brothers, the board of directors, even his personal lawyer in London. I opened the folder, page upon page of deeds in Amsterdam, Brussels, Frankfurt, stock certificates, account statements. Each detail meticulously arranged, bordering on artistry. Legal. Complete. Mine. It was as if father had spun a web of the future, woven solely for me. "Why?" I whispered. Olivier leaned back. "Your father never revealed everything. But in 15 years of working with him, I saw his mistrust of your brothers. He believed them careless, likely to destroy everything. He once told me Julien would bankrupt the company within 5 years, and Adrian would sell it off piece by piece. So he divided the empire, giving them the visible throne, while granting you the foundation, clean assets, free of debt. Tarnwick Industries, impressive on paper, carries a $300 million debt. Your brothers inherited it along with the company." I sat, reeling at the thought of father spending 13 years crafting this secret fortune, never breathing a word to me, never hinting, never letting me suspect he saw in me anything more than a disappointment. And now he was gone. I stood in a Parisian apartment worth 15 million, holding documents for 230 million euros. "When will I have access?" I asked. "Immediately," Olivier replied. "Everything is already in your name. You are here only to sign the final transfer papers. Your father insisted you come to Paris, see this place, and understand what he built for you." He guided me through the documents, pointing to each line for signature. My hand trembled on the last one. When it was done, he gathered them neatly and then said, "There is one more thing. A letter from your father, written 3 months before his death. He asked me to deliver it into your hands." He handed me a plain white envelope, my name written across it in father's hand. I stared at it for a long time before opening, my heart pounding with the rhythm of forgotten memories. Inside was a single page, his words, waiting for this moment to become the final chapter of our shared life. I held my father's letter, ink pressed with his very soul, seeping into me like stained glass light, illuminating the darkest corners of my heart, long shadowed by doubt and resentment. "Nicholas, if you are reading this, I am gone," it began. Each word was a bridge across the chasm that had divided us in life, leading me to a truth hidden behind years of silence. He wrote that he regretted not telling me everything while alive, that he had made me feel worthless, but it was all for one reason: to shield me from the greed of my brothers, Julien and Adrian. They had always watched, always waited, ready to twist any sign of favoritism into a battlefield, to turn my life into endless strife. So he gave them what they craved: titles, recognition, the illusion of power, while leaving me something far greater: real wealth, true security, freedom unchained from their ambitions. He foresaw that Julien and Adrian would destroy Tarnwick Industries, blind to the sacrifices needed to sustain it, fighting each other, making disastrous choices. When the company fell under its crushing debt, they would have nothing left, while I would have everything. He asked me not to waste my life hating him for the choice he made out of love, a love he always felt but could never show. I read the letter 3 times, each word carving itself into me like sacred scripture. Then I folded it back into the envelope, the weight of recent days lifting into a strange relief, as though the chains of invisibility I had worn so long had finally fallen away. Olivier watched silently, his eyes full of understanding that required no words. I rose, walked to the window, and looked out at Paris, the streets alive with people, unaware that my life had just been overturned, like a ship discovering a new course after the storm. What will happen to Tarnwick Industries? I asked. Olivier, with calm certainty, answered, your brothers will run it into the ground, as your father predicted. 5 years, perhaps less. Contracts will lapse. Revenues will collapse. The debt will crush them. Bankruptcy is inevitable. And I simply let it happen? I asked. You are not responsible for saving them, he replied. Your father made it clear. He wanted to free you from their world. I turned. How long have you known? 15 years, Olivier admitted. I helped him weave this plan, every detail, from the train ticket to the apartment to this letter. He wanted you to feel what he felt when he began with nothing. To understand that true wealth is not what the world sees, but what you build in silence, beyond the reach of others. I looked at the folder on the table, at the apartment around me, at the letter in my hand, realizing father had spent more than a decade creating this moment, letting me sit through board meetings as if invisible, letting my brothers mock me, letting the family treat me with cold indifference, as though I were nothing to him. All of it so he could give me something they could never take away. Thank you, I said at last. Olivier rose, remarking that my father had been a complicated man, but he always knew what he was doing. He handed me his business card, saying that everything I might need, the account numbers, property managers, investment advisors, was in the folder, and if I needed anything more, I knew how to reach him. He left, and I heard the elevator doors close, followed by a silence so deep it felt as though all of Paris was holding its breath with me. I sat down on a sheet-draped chair and looked around. My apartment, my 230 million euros, my future, of which my brothers knew nothing. In that silence, I felt the weight of the past sliding from my shoulders, giving way to something new. I spent 3 days in Paris. Olivier introduced me to the property managers who looked after the apartment. They removed the sheets, brought the rooms back to life, stocked the kitchen. By the second day, I felt at home, wandering through the rooms, imagining father at that same table, gazing out those same windows, secretly planning all of this for me. On the third day, I met with investment advisors, 2 Swiss men, whose gravity inspired trust. They opened the portfolio, real estate in 6 countries, stakes in 4 companies, bonds, commodities, diversified, yielding 8% annually, translating into 18 million a year. I asked if my brothers knew. They answered, no, father had ensured the trust was completely isolated, different jurisdiction, different banking system, no trail leading back to the UK. And what happens when Tarnwick Industries collapses? I asked. The senior advisor, Klaus, leaned forward. 5 years ago, father had transferred all intellectual property related to the European operations into a separate entity, part of my trust. When Tarnwick falls, I will own the patents. I can license them, sell them, or found a rival company, while my brothers will be left with nothing. Father had not simply given me money. He had given me the tools to replace him, to build something greater than he had. I asked if father had ever said anything about me. Klaus hesitated, then pulled out a small notebook, flipped through it, and read aloud. Nicholas is the only one who understands what this costs. The only one who will not waste his strength. Give him everything. He will know what to do. The words struck me like lightning, not with anger or sorrow, but with relief, because father had seen me. He had always seen me. He just could never say it aloud. The next morning, I flew back to London without telling anyone. A taxi from Heathrow took me straight home, to my cramped flat where everything looked exactly as it had, as if I were still that man trapped in a narrow life. But now I knew the truth. I sat on my worn sofa, opened my laptop, and saw 73 unread emails. Most were spam. 3 were from Julian. The first, sent the day after the funeral, was titled Estate Transition Meeting. He wrote that he and Adrian would be meeting with the board of directors to discuss the transfer plan for Tarnwick Industries. I was not needed, but they were informing me as a courtesy, promising to keep me in the loop. The second, 2 days later, was titled Office Clearance. They were vacating the old offices for the new leadership, including mine. I was to collect my belongings by the end of the week, or they would be disposed of. The third, received that very morning, was titled Severance. They had decided to terminate me officially, offering £50,000, as though that could redeem years of my labor, erased with their arrogance. I stared at Julian's words, carved cold and clinical into the screen. £50,000 presented as more than generous, considering your role. I read it twice, feeling something bitter rise inside me. Not anger, clarity. They were erasing me from the company's memory, crossing out my name as if it were a useless footnote. I shut the laptop. The room smelled faintly of yesterday's whiskey. I picked up my phone and dialed Olivier. His steady voice answered almost immediately. "Nicholas, is everything all right? I need to know something," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "The logistics company in Rotterdam father left me. What exactly does it do?" Olivier explained with methodical precision. The company handled freight and supply chains for industrial manufacturers, founded by father in 2010, with contracts across 40 firms in Europe and revenues of $60 million last year. "Does it compete with Tarnwick Industries?" I asked. "Not directly," he said, "but the infrastructure could easily be expanded to manufacture if you chose." And in that moment, something clicked inside me, like a key turning in a long-locked door. Julian's email still glowed on the screen. "We have decided to officially end your employment." "I want to expand," I said. "I want to build a manufacturing company that does what Tarnwick does, but better. Better products, better prices, better service. And I want every single one of their clients." There was a pause. I heard the echo of Olivier's thoughts before he replied. "That will destroy them." "I know," I said, the steel of resolve hardening in my chest. "And father would have approved." "I know that too," Olivier answered. We spoke for an hour, his voice guiding me through the labyrinth of possibilities, introducing me to consultants in Rotterdam, engineers, designers, people who knew manufacturing the way I knew every bolt and rivet of Tarnwick. People ready to build something new with me, from the ground up. By the end of the call, I had a plan. 6 months for product design, 6 for construction, 6 more to start pulling Tarnwick's clients away. I never answered Julian's emails. I never went to clear out my office. Let them think I had vanished into nothing, accepted their pitiful 50,000, and disappeared. Let them believe I was the nothing they always thought I was. 3 weeks later, I was in Rotterdam. The site was 60,000 square feet, perfectly located. The owner wanted to sell. I bought it the next day, cash. A challenge hurled straight at fate. Then I began hiring, poaching Tarnwick engineers by offering double their salaries. They all accepted, eyes lit with the kind of fire I had never seen in London boardrooms. By the end of the second month, we had prototypes. By the fourth, a full product line. Lighter, faster, half the cost of Tarnwick's. I named the company Asheville Systems, registered in the Netherlands, with my name hidden from public records. In London, no one knew I even existed. By the 6th month, I began reaching out to Tarnwick's clients, sending samples, offering prices they could not refuse. 3 switched immediately, 2 more within a month. Julian bled contracts, never once suspecting a shadow was stalking him. I watched from my Paris apartment, reviewing quarterly reports, seeing Tarnwick's revenues collapse, the board grow restless, Julian blaming the market, blaming competition, never imagining that I was the storm breaking his empire apart. By the end of the first year, Tarnwick had lost 20% of its revenue. The debt was unmanageable. Julian laid off 200 workers, sold the company jet, but it wasn't enough. Tarnwick was bleeding out, and I waited, as father had told me, building something better, something that would outlive them all. 18 months after the funeral, the phone rang while I was in Rotterdam with my production team. Julian's name flashed on the screen. I nearly ignored it, but curiosity, or perhaps a flicker of malice, made me answer. "Nicholas." His voice was taut, ready to snap. "We need to talk. About Tarnwick. About the family. Can you come to London? My house." He meant the Kensington mansion father had left him, the place I hadn't set foot in since the funeral. I hadn't spoken to either brother in over a year, not since they'd sent me that severance check I left untouched in the bank, letting them think I had vanished. When? I asked. Tomorrow. 2 o'clock. It's important. He hung up before I could answer. I stared at the phone until Petra, my production manager, looked up across the table. Problem. My brother wants to meet with the owner of Tarnwick, I said. She smiled. Good. Let him sweat. The next morning, I flew to London. A taxi carried me to Kensington, where the mansion loomed cold and imposing, like a mausoleum. The gates were open. Julian met me at the door before I could knock. He looked awful, thinner, gray at the temples, lines etched deep around his eyes. He led me inside, where the house felt empty. No staff, no sound, only our footsteps echoing against the marble. We entered Father's study. Julian sat at the desk. Adrian stood by the window, pale and drawn, even worse than Julian. Sit, Julian said. I did. The silence stretched until it threatened to suffocate. Adrian spoke first. We're in trouble. The company is dying. I said nothing. Julian cleared his throat and pressed on. Revenues down 38% in 18 months. Long-standing clients gone. 20-year contracts dissolved. They had cut costs, restructured, but nothing worked. The board was panicking. The banks were threatening to pull credit. And what does that have to do with me? I asked. Adrian's voice cracked with desperation. We need someone who understands the business. You worked with Father for 10 years. You know how it runs. You fired me, I reminded them. Sent me a severance check. Told me I was finished. Julian waved a hand. That was a mistake. We were overwhelmed, made bad choices, but we can fix this. We want you back. Chief Operating Officer. Full salary, benefits, stock package. Name your price. I looked at their faces, lined with fear, their eyes full of panic. They had no idea I was the reason for their ruin. To them, I was just the expendable middle manager they could drag back to bail out their sinking ship. No, I said. Julian blinked. What? I'm not coming back. I won't save you. You made your choice. Now live with it. Adrian stepped forward. Nicholas, be reasonable. This is our family legacy. Father built this company. Do you want to see it destroyed? Father didn't leave it to me, I said. He left it to you. So deal with it yourselves. I rose. Julian stood too, his face flushed. You're selfish. This is bigger than your pride. Thousands of people work at Tarnwick. If we go under, they lose their jobs, their families suffer. You'll let that happen just to spite us. I'll let it happen, I said, walking to the door. I stopped and turned. Because you deserve it. You mocked me all my life. Treated me as nothing. Laughed when Father gave me a train ticket. Don't pretend you care now. So no, Julian, I won't save you. I won't lift a finger. I walked out of the Kensington mansion, leaving behind the echo of my words, still ringing in the air like the final chord of a symphony, and without looking back slid into a taxi whose wheels were already carrying me to the airport, to a new chapter where the past would finally yield to the future I was building with cold resolve, knowing that when Tarnwick Industries collapsed, I would stand over its ruins feeling nothing, no guilt, no regret, only the satisfaction that justice, however ruthless, had prevailed. That same evening I flew back to Rotterdam, where the night greeted me with the cool breath of the canals and the shimmer of lights. By the next morning, Petra was already waiting at Asheville Systems' office, her eyes sharp as blades, sparking with curiosity. How did it go? She asked. They begged, I said, leaning back in the chair. I said no. She smirked, her smile like a spark in the dark. Perfect. We've just signed 2 more of their clients. Next quarter, they'll be ours. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and the numbers that lit up the screen played like notes of a victory anthem. Asheville Systems projected 90 million euros in revenue this year, while Tarnwick was expected to lose another 20%. The math was merciless. We were winning, they were dying. But it wasn't enough. I wanted Julian and Adrian to see my face at the moment their world collapsed, to understand exactly who had become their executioner, who had turned their arrogance into dust. 3 months later, the headlines confirmed what I had anticipated. Tarnwick announced layoffs of 800 workers. Their protests outside headquarters flared like a wildfire. Julian, with his pompous statement, blamed market conditions, while the board forced him to cut his own salary. Adrian sold the Kensington mansion. Their empire was bleeding out in plain view, and still they had no idea of the shadow stalking them. I decided it was time for the final blow. I planned a trip to London and told Olivier I wanted to attend Tarnwick's next board meeting. He said it was impossible. I wasn't on the board, held no official position. But he knew a man, a trusted shareholder with 0.003% of the company, entitled to be present. I bought his shares, paying triple their worth, signed the papers without a question, and secured his credentials. The meeting was set for the 15th, and I marked the date in my calendar like a hunter preparing for the decisive shot. On the day, I put on one of my father's old suits, the fabric still carrying the faint scent of his study, and flew to London, arriving early, a taxi taking me straight to Tarnwick headquarters. The building, once imposing, now seemed shrunken, aged. The lobby was half empty, the receptionist barely glancing up as she signed me in. The boardroom on the top floor greeted me with silence, broken only by the creak of chairs, 12 people around the long table. Julian at the head, his face taut as a mask, Adrian to his right, familiar directors from years past. No one noticed as I slipped into a chair at the far end, invisible as a ghost. Julian began, his voice straining for confidence, but the words betrayed him. Revenues down 41%, operating losses mounting, debt consuming reserves. Tarnwick was dying. Jeffrey, the eldest director, cut him off. Where are the clients going? Who's taking them? Julian faltered, mumbling about investigations. Jeffrey pressed. You've been investigating for 18 months. What have you found? Julian finally named a new competitor from the Netherlands, Asheville Systems, undercutting prices and poaching engineers. My pulse quickened, but I stayed still until Diana, another director, laughed bitterly. We don't have 6 months. The banks are pulling credit. The company will be liquidated. Chaos erupted, voices clashing, Julian trying to regain control. Then Jeffrey noticed me. Who's that? Heads turned. Julian's face drained of color as he squinted. Nicholas? I nodded. Hello, Julian. What are you doing here? I own shares. I have the right to be here. Since when? Last week. Adrian shot to his feet. You need to leave. I'm a shareholder. I'm not leaving. Jeffrey demanded an explanation. Nicholas is our brother. Julian began, but I cut him off. You fired me, handed me £50,000 and erased me. That doesn't matter, he snapped. It matters, I said. You want to know who's destroying this company? Who Asheville Systems is? The silence fell thick as a storm front. It's me. I own Asheville. I built it from nothing. And for 2 years I've been taking everything from you. Julian's knuckles whitened as he gripped the table. Adrian collapsed into his chair, mouth open, no sound coming. I went on. I founded it 22 months ago in Rotterdam. I've taken 43 of your contracts, and more are leaving next quarter. Diana leaned forward. Why? Because they took everything, I said. Father left them the company worth $540 million. He gave me a train ticket. They laughed, cast me out the moment he was gone. So I built something better, and now I'm taking it all back. Julian found his voice. This is sabotage. We'll sue you. For what? Competing? I didn't steal secrets, didn't break laws. I built a better company, and your clients chose me. That's capitalism, Julian, the one you never understood. He accused me of destroying jobs. You destroyed them with your arrogant incompetence, I replied. Jeffrey rose. You have a conflict of interest. You can't stay. I own 0.003%. I have every right, I said. And I'll say what I came to say. I looked at Julian and Adrian. Father knew you would fail. He spent 13 years preparing this moment. He left you a dying Tarnwick with debts and outdated infrastructure. He left me a Paris apartment, a trust worth $230 million, and a logistics company in Rotterdam to replace you. Julian lunged, seizing my collar. You're lying. Father would never. Read his letter, I said. Olivier has a copy. Jeffrey pulled him back. I straightened my collar and sat again, while the room froze in shock. Diana asked if it could be verified. I named Olivier, the lawyer in Paris. Jeffrey stepped out, made the call, returned 10 minutes later, grim. Confirmed. The trust, the apartment, the company. It's all true. Julian stared at the table. Adrian buried his head in his hands. Why? He whispered. Because your father didn't believe you could handle it, Diana said flatly. Julian slammed his fist. He gave us Tarnwick. To teach you, I said. To make you feel what I felt when you laughed at me, when you fired me. He gave you the rope to hang yourselves. Adrian's voice was icy. You could have competed fairly. Instead, you chose revenge. Yes, I said. I am my father's son. Jeffrey closed the folder. Meeting adjourned. Nicholas, leave. I stood, paused at the door. Tarnwick will be bankrupt in 6 months. I'll buy the assets, the patents, the brand, and fold them into Asheville. Everything our father built will survive. Under me. I walked out, took the elevator, climbed into a taxi, and my phone rang. Olivier. Nicholas, what have you done? Told the truth, I said. The board is furious. They'll want to sue. Let them try. I broke no law. You've made enemies. They were already enemies. Now they just know it. He sighed. Your father would be proud. Or horrified. Probably both. I ended the call and landed back in Rotterdam 3 hours later. Petra met me at the office, reading the look on my face. How bad? I told them everything. Who I am, what I built, why. She whistled. Bold. Necessary, I said. What now? Now we finish it. We worked through the night, dissecting contracts and financials, isolating Tarnwick's 12 remaining major clients. If we took half, the company would collapse in 90 days. The next morning I started calling procurement directors, sending offers, shipping samples. Each call, each email, a bullet aimed at the heart of my brother's empire. Within 2 weeks, 4 of Tarnwick's key clients signed with Asheville. 3 more followed a month later. I watched their revenues drop below survival, like a ship breached below the waterline. Banks smelled blood and pulled their loans. Julian's desperate pleas were met with silence. By the 3rd month, Tarnwick filed for bankruptcy. The news broke on a Tuesday morning as I sat in my Paris apartment, looking out over the city spread like a chessboard beneath me, the final move made. Olivier called. It's done. They filed this morning. Equivalent of Chapter 11. Assets will be auctioned in 6 weeks. You can bid, but be careful, Nicholas. If you buy Tarnwick, people will know you orchestrated this. Your reputation will suffer. I don't care about reputation, I said, steel flowing through my veins. I care about finishing what my father began. Then finish it, he said. But don't be surprised when they call you ruthless. Let them, I answered, ending the call, settling by the window as Paris glittered in the morning sun. I thought of my father, sitting here years ago, weaving his plans in the shadows, building something unseen until the moment came to strike. Power, as he taught me, does not shout. It waits, silent, patient, invisible, until it crashes down with devastating force. 6 weeks later, I flew into London for the auction, held in a faceless conference hall in the city center, the air thick with tension and the scent of expensive suits. The bankruptcy trustee presided, while 30 others gathered, investment firms, rivals, vultures eager to tear off pieces of a fallen empire. I sat at the back, quiet as a shadow, watching the bidding begin at £10 million. The trustee read the list of assets: real estate, equipment, patents, the Tarnwick brand itself. The numbers rose: 12, 15, 20, 25, 30 million, then slowed, and silence settled over the room. 30 million, once, twice, the trustee intoned. That's when I raised my hand. 50 million. Every head turned. A ripple of whispers tore through the room. Someone shouted it was illegal, but the trustee slammed the gavel. Order. The offer stands. Any counterbids? Silence. No one could match 50 million. No one dared challenge me. The gavel fell. Sold to Asheville Systems for £50 million. I signed the papers that same day, transferred the funds the next, and by week's end I owned everything. Tarnwick's name, its factories, its intellectual property. I folded it all into Asheville, rebranded, hired 300 of Tarnwick's former employees, offering them better pay, better conditions, better leadership than they had ever known under my brothers. Julian and Adrian were left with nothing. Bankruptcy had gutted their wealth. The mansion was gone, the jet gone, the company gone. They walked away with scraps, perhaps a few million between them, perhaps less. I never called, never gloated. I simply kept building, raising something stronger from Tarnwick's ashes, expanding Asheville into 6 new countries, driving revenues to 200 million euros in 3 years. My father's empire was reborn, stronger, cleaner mine. 2 years after the auction, a letter arrived at my Paris apartment, hand-delivered, in a plain envelope with no return address. Inside, a single page written in Adrian's hand. Nicholas, I know you will never forgive us, and I do not ask it. I only want you to know that I understand now what father did and why. You were right. We did not deserve Tarnwick. We were careless, arrogant, stupid. We destroyed what he built while blaming everyone but ourselves. Julian refuses to admit it, still insists you sabotaged us. But I see the truth. You won because you were better, because you understood sacrifice and were willing to go further than we ever would. I don't expect an answer. I just want you to know that I regret the way I treated you, mocking, dismissing, belittling you. You were always the one who mattered most. Father knew it. I wish I had. I read it twice, folded it, and put it away without reply. Adrian's apology didn't erase the past, didn't wash away the humiliation, but it confirmed what I already knew. I had won. 3 months later, I was in London for a business dinner in Mayfair. Crystal glasses caught the candlelight, conversation flowed like wine, and we wrapped up around 10. Stepping outside into the cool night, I saw him, Julian, standing across the street, watching me. He looked older, thinner, his once arrogant eyes now tired, extinguished. Slowly, he crossed over and stopped a few paces away. Nicholas, he said. Julian, I answered. We stood in silence while cars hissed by and strangers vanished into the night. I heard about Asheville, he said at last. 200 million. Impressive. Thank you. You really did it. Destroyed us and built something better. Yes. He nodded, staring at the pavement. I don't blame you anymore. I did for a long time. But now, I understand. We deserved it. I'm glad you see that. He looked up. Are you happy? You've won. You have everything. The company, the money, the respect. Was it worth it? I hesitated, memories crashing in. Years of planning, sleepless nights, the pressure, the thrill of their downfall, the emptiness that followed. Yes, I said at last. It was worth it. He gave a faint, weary smile. Good. I hope that's true. Then he turned and walked away, swallowed by the crowd. I never saw him again. The next morning I flew back to Paris. In my apartment, I sat before the city stretched out like a map of conquests. My father's letter lay in a drawer. I took it out and read again. Build something better. Build something that lasts. And do not waste your time hating me for what I did. I made my choice because I love you. I always have. I folded it back, feeling the weight of his words settle inside me like the foundation I had built upon. He was right. I had created something stronger, something that would outlive Tarnwick, Julian, Adrian, all of them. I had done it the way he taught me, quietly, patiently, ruthlessly. My Paris apartment became home, the command center from which I ran Asheville, expanding production, logistics, distribution, hiring the best, creating a culture where merit mattered more than privilege. Within 5 years, we operated in 14 countries. Revenues reached 400 million euros, profits doubled, and Asheville stood among the most respected firms in Europe. I established a fund for workers displaced by Tarnwick's collapse, retraining them. Some even joined me, knowing I had destroyed their former employer, yet respecting that I gave them something better. Julian disappeared into small-time consulting. Adrian moved to Spain, running a boutique hotel with his wife, choosing quiet exile. The rest of the family turned away. An aunt, cousins who had laughed at me at the funeral. Some called me ruthless, a traitor, but their judgment meant nothing. I had power, real, enduring power. Olivier and I met once a year over dinner in Paris, in the same restaurant, where he, older now but sharp as ever, once told me over the third bottle of wine, "Your father would be proud. You achieved what he hoped for. You survived. You excelled. You proved you were the better man. Sometimes it doesn't feel like victory, I admit it. I'm alone. No family. No brothers." He nodded. That is the price. Your father paid it too, choosing business over everything, relationships, happiness, love. You've made the same choice. Was it worth it? I asked. Only you can know. And I did. The apartment, the money, the success, the silence, the loneliness, the wait. It was worth it. Because I had built something that mattered, something that would outlast me. just as my father intended. 10 years after his death, an envelope arrived, cream paper embossed in gilt. At my Paris table, I opened it. An invitation to the opening of Tarnwick House, a museum of British industrial heritage in the Kensington mansion Julian had lost. I nearly threw it away until I noticed a handwritten note. Nicholas, I hope you'll come. There's something you must see. Jeffrey. Jeffrey, the board member from that final meeting, hadn't contacted me since the auction. His words intrigued me. I flew to London 2 days before the ceremony, stayed in Knightsbridge, and on the morning itself, dressed in a suit and drove to Kensington. The street was closed, reporters and politicians crowded the entrance. Inside, marble gleamed, walls displayed exhibits on British industry, and at the center, my father's story, his face staring out from memorial plaques. Jeffrey found me by the staircase, leaning on a cane but sharp-eyed. Nicholas, thank you for coming. You look well, I said. He smirked. Old, but breathing. Come, there's something you should see. We walked past displays, down a corridor from my childhood, to a small windowless room where the walls were covered with documents, photos, letters. What is this? I asked. Your father's private collection, Jeffrey said. Kept in a vault. The museum bought it at the estate sale. I stepped closer, heart tightening. Blueprints of Tarnwick's first machines, his notes on European expansion, photographs from Paris, Lyon, Rotterdam, and one letter, addressed to me, never sent, dated a year before his death. My hands shook as I read. Nicholas, if I do not live to say this, know that you are the only one who understood the work. I did not build for glory, nor for them, but for you. You will continue where I stop, and you will make it better. I believe in you. I stood frozen, the past and present colliding, while Jeffrey's voice softened. He always knew what you'd become. I nodded, unable to speak, realizing that all of it, the pain, the solitude, the fight, had not been in vain. I had finished his work, built the empire he wanted. And now, standing amid his legacy, I finally felt him beside me. That small museum room held 47 letters. Letters about me, about his plans, his fears for Tarnwick. He had spent decades shaping it so I would survive. Why show me this now? I asked, my throat tight. So you understand, Jeffrey said. Your father was not cruel. He was a strategist. He did not hate Julian and Adrian. He simply knew they would fail. Everything he did was to ensure the right man carried the work forward. I stared at the handwriting, at his care disguised as coldness. Did anyone else know? Only Olivier, Jeffrey said. And me, 6 months before he died. He asked me to make sure you saw this room. To make you understand it was not vengeance, but love. I looked away, swallowing hard. He got what he wanted. I built what he asked. I protected it. I improved it. I know, Jeffrey said. Asheville is a marvel. You did exactly what he hoped. But I destroyed my brothers, I whispered. They destroyed themselves, Jeffrey said simply. You gave them a chance. They squandered it. That is not on you. The museum staff called us to the main gallery. Jeffrey led me out, where the crowd gathered around a bronze statue of my father, unveiled to applause, life-sized, hands in his pockets, gazing forward as though still planning the future. The plaque read, "In memory of the builder, the visionary, the father." The crowd clapped, and I stood at the back, grief rising like a tide, not for what was lost, but for what I never truly had. A father who might have spoken those words aloud instead of through letters and secret plans. After the ceremony, I wandered through the exhibits alone, reading plaques, studying photographs where my father's life was laid bare for strangers' eyes, his achievements, his struggles, his legacy. Julian and Adrian were nowhere to be found, erased from history because they had left nothing lasting, unlike me. At sunset, I stepped outside the museum, paused at the gates, and turned back to look at the mansion, now not just a house, but a monument to my father's idea, his faith in me. And in that moment I understood, revenge was no longer necessary. I already had everything that mattered, the business I had built, the empire that had surpassed even his dreams. That evening I returned to Paris, sat down in my apartment, opened my laptop, and reviewed the reports. Asheville was on track to reach €600 million in revenue that year, with operations in 15 countries, for 1,000 employees, contracts with Europe's largest corporations. My father's company had been reborn, better, stronger, untouchable. I thought of Julian and Adrian, where they might be now, whether they regretted anything, but realized I no longer cared. They were ghosts of the past, irrelevant. The next morning, Olivier called, and I told him about the museum, the letters. Jeffrey, your father wanted you to see that, he said. He told me before he died that you needed to understand. It was never about hatred, but about preparation. Now I understand, I replied. Then let it go, he said. Move forward. Build something for yourself, not just for him. What do you mean? I asked. And he explained. You've lived in his shadow for 10 years, carrying out his plans. But what do you want, Nicholas? What will be yours? The question caught me off guard, hanging in the air like a challenge. What did I want? For 10 years I had proven myself, that I was worthy, that my father was right, that my brothers were wrong. But I had never asked what I wanted. I don't know, I admitted. Then find out, Olivier said. You have money, power, freedom. Use them for what matters to you. We spoke for another hour, and when I hung up, I sat by the window, looking at Paris, the city my father had given me, the home he had built in secret, the foundation that had given me freedom. Olivier was right. I had been living my father's dream, not mine. I began to ask questions, to think about what mattered to me, what counted not for legacy but for myself. The answers came slowly, over weeks and months of reflection, but I realized this. I cared about the people who built with their hands, about workers who came in every day without glory but with dignity. In them, I saw my father. In them, I saw myself. I decided Asheville would become not just a profit machine, but a company that changed lives. We launched retraining programs for workers whose skills had become obsolete, built training centers in every region where we operated, and I personally met employees, listened to them, gave them a voice. We created a fund to support families whose incomes had been hurt by automation, and I saw their eyes light up when they were given a chance to start again. Asheville grew to $700 million in revenue within 2 years, but what mattered more were the letters from workers thanking me for opportunity, for respect, for giving them more than just a job. One day, sitting in my office in Rotterdam, I received another letter, not from Adrian, not from Julian, but from Petra, my production manager, who now headed our European division. She wrote, Nicholas, I've seen what you've done for people. You haven't just built a company, you've built a community. Your father would be proud, but I think you've surpassed him. This is yours, not his. I smiled, folded the letter, and placed it beside my father's. She was right. I had stepped out of his shadow, found my own path, and for the first time in years felt that I was building not out of revenge, not to prove anything, but for myself. Paris was my home, but I often returned to Rotterdam, walking the factory floors, talking with engineers, watching the machines we created come alive. I no longer sought my family's approval, no longer thought of Julian and Adrian, no longer looked back. I had a company, a purpose, a people, and that was enough. My father had given me the beginning, but I had written my own story. And, looking out over the city from my apartment, I knew this was only the beginning. I had stood in that museum room, surrounded by my father's letters, his plans, his faith in me, and I felt the past release me, as if I had finally dropped the chains I had been dragging for years. Jeffrey had shown me the truth. My father hadn't just built an empire, he had built me. And now it was my turn to decide what I would build for myself. When I left the museum that evening, I knew revenge was finished, but my story was not. I returned to Paris, sat at my window overlooking the city that had become mine, and began asking myself the question Olivier had left in my mind. What do I want? The answer didn't come right away, but when it did, it was clearer than I expected. I wanted to give people what I never had in my youth: a chance, dignity, the opportunity to prove themselves. Not for glory, not for monuments, but for the quiet satisfaction of knowing I had changed lives. I founded a trust, not for flashy charity, but for real work: education, vocational schools, apprenticeship programs that taught real skills: welding, engineering, design, manufacturing. I invested 20 million euros into it, hired people who knew what it meant to work with their hands, to create from nothing, to build from the ground up. Within 2 years, the foundation had trained 1,000 people, placed them in jobs across Europe, given them careers and a sense of dignity, and I knew this was what I wanted. Not revenge, not bronze statues, but this: seeing people like I once was, nobodies, stand up and move forward. Each of their successes was my own, and the feeling was purer than any victory over my brothers. Julian and Adrian vanished from my life for good. From distant relatives, I learned that Julian had moved to Portugal, starting a small consulting firm that barely kept afloat, bringing in just enough for a modest life without excess. His world shrank to a rented apartment overlooking the Tejo, where he spent evenings alone. The friends from his old life, board members, social sycophants, those who once fought for his attention, disappeared, finding new idols, new wealth. Julian became invisible, a shadow of who he once was, and I knew too well what it meant to be erased. He had once made me feel the same. Adrian remained in Spain. His boutique hotel prospered for a few years before being swallowed by a larger chain. He sold his share, moved to a coastal town, worked in a marina renting boats to tourists. His wife left him, taking their daughter, and he saw her only twice a year, Christmas and summer. His life became quiet, modest, almost unrecognizable compared to the Adrian who had laughed at me at our father's funeral. Neither of them ever recovered, reduced to cautionary footnotes about brothers who inherited an empire and burned it to the ground. The family, eventually, softened toward me. 5 years after the museum's opening, my aunt invited me to Christmas dinner. I went, though I knew it would be awkward. The table was set, conversations drifted over trivialities, and no one mentioned Tarnwick, father, or the past. We ate, smiled, pretended all was well, and I left relieved, knowing that their forgiveness, or lack of it, meant nothing. I kept the Paris apartment, split my time there and in Rotterdam, traveling, meeting clients, investors, employees, building not just a company, but a life that felt real. Each year, on the anniversary of my father's death, I went to his grave, laid flowers, and sat for an hour telling him about Asheville, about the foundation, about the people I had helped. I didn't know if he would have approved, but I liked to think he would have understood that I had done more than he asked. I had built not only an empire, but also meaning. 10 years became 15. 15 became 20. Asheville grew into one of Europe's largest manufacturing companies, with 1 billion euros in revenue, operations in 20 countries, and 10,000 employees. The foundation trained tens of thousands, giving them skills, jobs, futures. I never married, never had children, pouring everything into the work, into the legacy, into the people who depended on me, and I never once regretted it. Not once. Because I had created something that mattered, something lasting, something worthy of the sacrifice my father had made for me, and of the sacrifice I had made myself. Julian and Adrian remained in the past, their lives mere echoes. Julian's consulting firm collapsed within 3 years, and he ended up as a manager at a small investment fund in Lisbon, with a modest salary and colorless work. Adrian, after losing the hotel, stayed on at the marina, repairing boats, living alone after his wife left, in a world far from where he once imagined himself a king. I understood then that true legacy isn't what you're given, but what you create for yourself. My father gave me a foundation, but I built on it something greater, not just a company, but a community that lived, breathed, grew. In Paris, in my apartment, I often sat by the window looking out over the city and thought of him, of his letters, of his words. Build something better. I had done that, but I had also done more. I had built something of my own. And in those quiet moments, when the city slept, I felt him beside me, not as a shadow, but as an equal, the man who would have nodded, seeing that I had become not just his continuation, but myself.